This panel will be moderated by, okay, the topic is residential resilience. Will the West African residential real markets remain resilient? Prospects, locations, and challenges. You would agree with me that this is a very timely and important topic, especially for a panel. This panel will be moderated by Lore Olutimilehin, CEO, Trilum Real Estate. Please put your hands together for him as he comes up to moderate the panel. Thank you, Mr. Lore. In conversation with him would be Frank Okosun, Senior Partner and CEO, Knight Frank Nigeria. Please make your way to the stage. Please put your hands together for him. We have Elizabeth Ogonibu, Regional Representative, Anglophone West Africa, Shelter Afrique. Joining her would be Oladimeji Odushote, Executive Director, Real Estate Sankara Investments, and we would have Chima Emere, Director, Homework Development and Properties Limited. Please put your hands together for everyone on this panel. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I will be leaving this to Larry, and I'm looking forward to a wonderful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be back here and to see so many familiar faces. My name is Lanre Olutimilehin. I'm a director at Trillium Real Estate Partners. We are a real estate services firm based in Nigeria. And with me today, I have Yinka Omoni to my left. He's an associate partner at Knight Frank with responsibility for capital markets and property management, so not Mr. Okosun. To his left, I have Elizabeth Ogonebu, who is a regional representative of Shelter Afrique in Anglophone West Africa. She has about 15 years of experience in the UK and Nigerian investment banking and infrastructure development sector. To her left, I have Mr. Dimeji Odushote, who is the Executive Director Real Estate at Sankore Investments, leading Nigerian wealth management firm, and he has worked with a variety of real estate assets and has extensive experience in hospitality and other sectors. And finally, Mr. Chima Emerue, who is a director at Homework Development and Properties Limited. So Chima is a trained architect, property developer, and an avid green design and sustainability enthusiast. So welcome, everybody. I'm hoping we're going to have a very interesting and engaging discussion. And following on from the last panel, I think, many of the things that were already being mentioned are things we're going to talk about right now. But we're going to be focusing on the residential real estate market. I think the last few years have seen very strong performance in the residential sector. And it has been very defensive and resilient despite COVID-19 versus other parts of the market. And I mean, we know it's driven by factors that we all know. The housing deficit, which has been mentioned already several times. Diaspora investment is one factor, as well as the work from home impact that we saw starting last year. So these are things that I think we see are common across various cities in the continent. And various interventions are in place to address all these things. So I guess the question is, what is resilience and how do we define it? I'm sorry, I'm going to stop talking very soon so you can actually hear from the panelists. So, I mean, we can measure it in terms of financial performance or in terms of housing resilience, where we speak about access, affordability, and supply, as well as increasingly housing resilience in terms of some of the physical shocks we're seeing because of climate change. And the context is also sustainability in terms of the environment and, increasing carbon emissions, rising global temperatures, because the built environment is said to account for nearly 40% of global CO2 emissions, directly and indirectly. And in the light of the recent COP26 meetings, we have many new climate plans, we have all these net zero targets. So many organizations have made pledges, but I think we're going to try to answer what does it all mean for us here in Africa. So Yinka, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
So residential real estate performed very strongly versus other segments over the last year plus. So, I mean, can you tell us what drove this performance? Which market stood out for you? And if you see this trend continuing.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Inka, and thank you all for having me here. For the residential market, I think one of the things that really drove it was because the money market wasn't really impressive as that last year. And so a lot of people decided to divest and put their money in real estate markets. And when I mean real estate, I mean the residential part now. Now, in that period, we found out that there were a lot of demand for short stay apartments. There were a lot of people looking to move into gated communities, which was an aftermath of what happened about NSAS. Because I'm more of a transaction person, so these were the things that we were saying at that time. People were keen to buy into estates, just to stay away from where people can have easy access to them. I mean, there was a documentary about the people that stood just across Banana Island Road, if you were very familiar about that. That was for the fee and security of people that were staying in that vicinity. So people wanted to be in estates, people wanted to stay where, before you even go in, there's a bit of security and you can't just drive into their places. So that drove the market at that time. And additionally, in some other locations too, when you go towards the mainland, it was anything issues regarding power. At a point, PHCN were driving a part of like a strategy whereby they were speaking to private estates to give them about 20 to 22 hours in a day, where you pay above the market rate in terms of kilowatt hour. So this also drove the market at that time. And so people were always keen to buy into those kind of places. Then I mentioned earlier about the short stay apartments. I think if you go around now, recently we've had a lot of people asking us we have so many properties out there that are empty maybe we just want a corporate client to take it, and they're strictly people that want to do short stay apartments. So that's also driven, people are buying across the Lekki corridor mostly, that's where we're seeing that. And these are the things that actually drove the market as of last year. And it's still going on. And if you say what stood out for me in terms of location, I would say Banana Island, because the way the value shot up in Banana Island was tremendous, over 120%. As it stands now, land value rose in that neighborhood. But across the market, in terms of rentals, it didn't really rise as much. But in terms of land values, most of the market rose by a considerable amount of percentage. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Yinka. And thank you for setting some context for us as we continue the conversation. Elizabeth, Shelter Afrique has been taking an active role in driving development of affordable housing in Africa. So I guess, the question for you, my first question for you is that, how are you working to improve housing resilience in terms of access to financing? It's something we've heard in the last panel. It's come up several times. In terms of affordability, I mean, we heard the last set of panelists talk very passionately about that. And also sustainability. So what is Shelter Afrique doing at the moment, to address all these issues that keep coming up time and time again?
Thank you, Larry. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Mr. Femi. Good to meet you. I'll talk to you after. Yeah. So, very interesting topic. As we are all aware, climate change is impacting the environment. The Earth's climate is changing. The increase in greenhouse gases has led to an increase in the Earth's temperature. this has led to extreme weather events, such as the rising sea levels, violent storms, hurricanes, drought. This is impacting housing and housing finance. It's impacting actually all governments, every sector, and all individuals. The housing finance will not be spared. Some of the impacts we are seeing is destruction of property. A typical example I can just say is when Hurricane Katrina, when it happened, destroyed over 3,000 properties. The impact is actually huge. Another impact is default in repayment of mortgages. Then another one is climate migration, where people are leaving areas that have been affected, leaving their homes to safer regions. And finance has a huge role to play in achieving sustainability development goals. Sustainable finance can actually help increase the availability of renewable energy and also help fund green housing projects. For us as Shelter Afrique, we support the UN Sustainability Development Goals, specifically SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities. We are providing sustainable finance and support sustainable growth by allocating funding to sustainable companies that are helping to create a more sustainable future. For many decades, maximizing profit has always been the leading objective of corporate finance, which boils down to maximizing financial values and shareholders' values. But the key message for us as Shelter Afrique is we've moved on from just maximizing profit to integrated value, which combines financial value, environmental and social values. And we are considering, in deciding on the kinds of transaction we fund, we are looking at the impact of companies on society and on the earth system. And then we are considering more the development impact of transaction. When we look at the issue of climate change, you won't just say, oh, I am immune, or Nigeria would not experience these challenges. The truth is, if anything is happening to a financial institution, even in Japan, can affect banks in Nigeria. You can remember during the financial crisis in 2007, 2018, it started with in the housing sector, the banks in USA, but it had a huge impact in Nigeria. We experienced the credit crunch. So housing will not be spared. Housing finance will not be spared. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth, please, round of applause. So just a quick follow-up question to that. So how are the companies you're dealing with, that you are talking to about some of these measures you want in place, social, sustainability, ESG, how are they responding to what Shelter Afrique is doing?
Okay, so what we are seeing now, Nigerians are very knowledgeable and very resilient people. So even before approaching us, we are seeing more people, they are more aware. They are providing more information about the impact the project is having on the society. They are providing information and considering factors like the number of houses they are building, the number of women they are giving employment to, revenue that will be generated by government, and they are taking more development issues into consideration in building homes. Most of them are already building greenhouses, green projects. So they are more aware, and we are seeing more and more of such transactions.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So I'm going to move to Dimeji now. Dimeji, Sankore is approaching resilience, if I can put it that way, or sustainability from the perspective of creative solutions to many of the, I guess, housing and real estate issues that we face in Nigeria. So, can you talk about your approach with us and some of the ways you are innovating in the market right now?
All right, thank you, Larry. Afternoon, everyone. And thanks to the organizers of WAPI for having us here. So let me just start with, I guess, looking broadly at resilience, because it's a pretty broad topic. Elizabeth touched a lot on the climatic aspect of that, and sustainability from a green point of view and climatic part. I think for me, I'd like to kind of speak more towards the socioeconomic sustainability and socioeconomic resilience, as the case may be. The other thing I'd like to just point out about resilience for us is the idea of the future, right? So resilience is not about the now. For us, it's about the future. And so these kind of two things will kind of, I guess, shape my comments and conversation going forward. So for us, there are kind of three areas we're looking at in terms of, the topic of resilience and how we're approaching this. One is, financial sustainability. And I think a lot of that was spoken to about in the previous session. But I'll just kind of touch on that a bit. Again, so I'm Executive Director for Real Estate at Sanctuary. Sanctuary is primarily a wealth management firm, asset management firm. I serve primarily as the MD of our real estate subsidiary. But being part of that ecosystem, the idea of financial sustainability is something that we're bringing to the table in the sense that you can't really just develop real estate if you're not thinking about that aspect. And again, this is something that was said in the previous sessions. For us, we're looking to the future and how we can kind of bridge that gap. There is the institutional market, which we're definitely playing to. But what I'd like to kind of just touch on is this idea of, I think it was also mentioned, crowdfunding. And how do we get retail investors into real estate, right? And that's something that we're definitely actively looking at in thinking about our real estate. That beyond just developing properties, we're also looking towards how we exit that so that we can keep the cycle going, right? Without that exit, you're just tying down capital and you can't really create more inventory for the benefit of everybody else and creating the sustainable environment. So the idea of kind of retail investment in real estate, fractional or otherwise, is something that we're looking at. We have a platform as part of the group called Wealth.ng, where we sell traditional investment products, equities and the likes. But in the past, we've created, again, kind of retail investments into things like agriculture, partnering with certain partners, et cetera, et cetera. We plan to do the same thing for real estate, starting, of course, with pilot projects, but we think this is definitely an avenue that we can use to kind of explore that going forward. So financial sustainability is definitely one thing. The second part of resilience is the idea of being adaptable. Again, we're talking about the future, right? If you're going to be resilient into the future, again, a lot of talk was mentioned about the demography of tomorrow and all that in terms of where the future is going to. And for us, just being able to adapt to that market, real estate of 10 years ago is not going to be the real estate of 10 years to come. And so we are also looking to that space of saying, how can we create products that are adapting to new trends? One of the things we're doing, and I guess a major area we're kind of playing into that, is the idea of co-living. So I think it was Funke that was talking about how people now want to live in the city center. Of course, millennials, Gen Zs, all these other letters, want to be closer to where things are happening. But there's realities to be faced, practical things. And so the idea of co-living as a trend, which we've seen in other parts of the world, and even here in Nigeria in different kind of fashions, is something that we're actually bullishly looking at, and how we can create these kind of environments that create these new products that allow people to, still have a residential experience going into the future. So that's another thing, just in terms of adaptability in being resilient. And then the third thing would be the idea of, if you're going to talk about resilience and sustainability, housing is not a vacuum, right? It's not just about houses, right? And I always, it's been said many times, this idea of thinking about real estate to be more than just bricks and mortar, right? So it's, what else do we need to be doing to be creating sustainable communities, right, beyond just housing? So looking beyond just your house or your developments, we're also trying to explore things around community, city building, mixed-use environments, et cetera, right? So that's kind of like the third aspect. Sustainable communities would be the third aspect. And these are all, I guess, lofty goals in and of themselves, but we think that you actually have to kind of approach this almost end-to-end to deliver on the resilience. So from sustainable communities to adaptable products to financial sustainability. And if we kind of get that, again, I wouldn't
we're pretty, quote unquote, new in the game, but we really have ambitions about doing this into the future, and that's kind of where we're approaching this from.
Thank you so much, Timeji. So, financial resilience, adaptability, and sustainable communities. Okay, thank you. Chima, so I think, I'm really eager to hear from you. So your practice focuses on developing sustainably, and you have an interest in green architecture. So, I'd just like to hear from you, what methods you're applying to enhance resilience, affordability, and sustainability in your ongoing developments. And, as a follow-up to that, how have you found the market over the last 2 years? Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Larry. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chima, as Larry introduced me. Okay, so in your opening statement, you said something about how the built environment contributes 40% of global emissions, right? So just as a follow-up to that, about 30 to 70% of that is generated, or rather, it is attributed to HVAC issues. Basically, just trying to heat or cool your spaces, depending on what parts of the world you're in. So basically, there is a problem, and the fact is this: climate change is real. That's one, and two. So right now, globally, what we're trying to do is to reverse climate change and its effects. But the thing is that it will become irreversible if right now, if we do not change the way we design and the way we build. If we do not change the way we design and the way we build, then it will become irreversible, seeing that a huge part of that is caused by the built environment. So as you mentioned, okay, so at Homework Group, so we are a multidisciplinary firm. We are architects and engineers and the like. So, but what I think at the very core, I and my partner, we are both trained architects. So what we are is I think of us as some kind of think tank, basically, because at our very core, what we are architects, and architects are problem solvers. It is what it is. So so yes, so there's a saying I came across somewhere that said, all problems are solved by good design. So the issue now becomes, how do we solve that problem by good design? Now, without going into too much detail, without boring people with technical niceties, I would say that what we do on holistically is that we try to integrate intelligent biophilic designs, that's designs that are more in tune with nature, in all of our developments, basically riding on the laws of nature in general and the laws of physics in particular, just following those laws as regards ventilation, lighting, heating and cooling, mostly cooling on this part of the world because it's hot already. Yes. So we believe that if we do this building by building, project by project, then what we do globally is that we do our own bits towards reducing the carbon footprint of all of our projects, all of our developments, and thereby basically that's where green design starts from, design by design. So we believe that when we do that, then we ultimately achieve the common goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chima. Okay, Yinka, I'm going to come back to you. So I guess, we've all identified that the climate impact is a huge concern, in development. Residential development is a big portion of overall real estate development. So how do you, and we have to consider sustainability issues. It's something people are thinking about. We have to think about it more critically. So how do these kind of concerns, impact, how do you think they will impact the performance of residential real estate in the short, medium, and long term?
Well, now we're having a lot of people build in that, thinking about sustainability when they build. So not necessarily now. Obviously, it will take into consideration the fact that as you build, it takes more money. But in the long term, the whole essence is to reduce a few things, whereby your management costs, maintenance cost is reduced. You know, people will have to be shepherded into understanding what it is to live in a place where there is sustainability, where, you know, where the ESGs have been taken into consideration. I mean, globally, even acquiring land or doing due diligence, ESGs are looked at before they even do that. So obviously, by the time you get to the leasing and then the asset management, you also have to consider the fact that ESGs has to be an important part of whatever you're doing. So in the initial, in the the short term, it might not necessarily have so much of a big impact, but over the long term, medium and long term, definitely, it's going to improve the buildings in a way whereby there's obsolescence will definitely reduce, because all the factors, all the features that will be put in place in those buildings will help to preserve the value of the property, and as well as ensure that there's a premium to be paid for those features that are put in the property. So in the long term, it will definitely be something worth the while of anybody that's investing in such kind of buildings.
Okay, I think that's something we're going to try to discuss and unpack as we go along. Whether, you know, the African consumer appreciates the cost of these kind of enhancements.
Funke said something when she was here that when they started, people didn't really, nobody could understand what they were doing initially. But over time, you find out that their building now is almost at 80 to 90% occupied, because people have now understood what it means to be in a building that is very energy efficient and, you know, and all of those things. So I think in due time, people would know, the people that understand what it is to spend so much money in power, in, you know, how you consume water, or how it is recycled and all of that, will understand that I'd rather be in a very functional building where my cost for maintenance is reduced and pay the premium for that than just being any kind of building.
Okay, thank you, Inka.
Thank you.
So, Elizabeth, climate change has taken a toll on, you know, many of the world's most vulnerable communities. You know, there's one report, a World Risk Report, which says of the 15 most vulnerable communities globally, 13 are in Africa, and they're most prone to natural disasters. You mentioned Hurricane Katrina, the impact that had. So, I mean, what can be done to improve resilience in terms of financing housing for these kinds of communities, and also in terms of the construction itself?
Okay, thank you. So there are two main approaches. The first one being climate mitigation. I know the Major mentioned it. Climate mitigation, they are making efforts to reduce or prevent emission of greenhouse gases, and thereby reducing the Earth's temperature. The housing sector would have to make more effort to reduce greenhouse emissions. Construction has a huge impact on the environment, especially poorly built houses and poorly designed houses. It uses a lot more energy and thereby increasing global warming. So one of the things to do is green building. We have to do more green building projects. Building green reduces energy, reduces carbon, water, and waste. And then financial institutions should fund more green building projects. And then the second approach is climate adaptation, whereby we deliberately build web building to build structures that would be able to adapt to the effects of global warming. For example, building more stronger residential structures in areas that are prone to flood risk. We can actually raise the the foundation, the floor, and then, of course, building a stronger infrastructure. So those are the things that we need to start taking seriously now.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you. We're running out of time, but so I'm going to, before I come back to Dimeji, I'm going to jump again. So Chima, you know, I guess, you know, we're talking about all these things, sustainable features, all these things sound like more cost. You know, we're struggling with affordability issues for housing broadly. And now we have to go green, we have to do this. So it's more cost. How is the consumer going to deal with this? Do they appreciate all these things that are being mentioned now? And what can be done to achieve these things whilst mitigating cost?
All right, so yes, so most of us here, when you hear green design or green architecture, the first thing that comes to mind, we think of fields of solar panels and the landscape with wind turbines and so on and so forth, which is true. But the thing is, that's active sustainability. That's the one that costs money to implement. So what we can do is we can put in place passive sustainability. So passive sustainability basically is you trying to mitigate the expenses through design. So at Homework, what we do is we basically go back to the drawing board and we solve the problem from the best place problem can be solved. The best place problem can be solved is at the beginning, at the design stage. So what we do basically is we tackle the low-hanging fruits, like from building orientation to face prevalent winds, making use of skylights, treating the external walls differently, particularly the walls that are south-facing, the walls that are east and west-facing, and so southern hemisphere. This is, I can go on and on, but I don't go into too much details. But basically, we use of materials with high thermal index and so on and so forth. And another thing one of the things that we try to do while dealing with HVAC issues, basically trying to encourage the wind to flow. So basically, because that's really what ventilation is when wind, you know how to take cross ventilation, when it passes through and so on and so forth. Yes, but how do you get it to pass through? With intelligent design. So what we try to do is we try to design creating high and low pressure zones on the external envelope of the building, such that the wind passes from the high pressure zone to the low pressure zone. And while it's doing that, we employ some other tricks to cool the breeze or rather to cool the wind that is passing through. I could go into detail, but I fear that I might lose you in some of the details. But trust me, it works. This is not me, this is science. And it actually works. So, and like I said, so when you do this, and so when you put in place passive sustainability, the end user isn't even aware of the cost because it comes at no cost to him. The only cost is basically the mental, let's say, capital on the side of the architects. So the only thing is that the end user just somehow has a comfortable user experience, and that building now has a reduced carbon footprint, reduced emissions, and so on and so forth. So, and I believe that if this becomes the norm, as one of the previous speakers before me said, if we more or less like go back time and reinvent the wheel, then we will see that this problem will be solved without it even arising and at no additional cost. All you need to do is just practice good design.
Thank you, Chima.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Dimeji, sorry, I don't have a lot of time for your response, but I think, you touched on what Sankore is doing. You mentioned one product. You declined to mention other things. But how are you going to achieve scale, in terms of the development and in terms of raising the finance you need for what you are doing?
So not too much time. I think the key focus for us, at least one of the key areas, is the idea of, I would say, productizing real estate, right? So thinking of real estate as a product, right? So if you're going to scale, the idea of kind of couture, real estate doesn't come into mind. So again, just focusing on the demographics that we're focusing on. So if I take co-living, like I said, as a sector that we're looking at, that lends itself naturally to things like product development, right? And with product development, we can scale much faster than we would with more bespoke solutions to real estate, as the case may be. So we're trying to actually create brands and products around those spaces where we can have templates and things that we can roll out pretty quickly, start developing things like franchise models for development, et cetera, to achieve a standard that we're looking at the cost we're looking at, et cetera, but to scale. So in a I can go into detail, but in a nutshell, I think that's one of the things we're looking at to kind of get to where we're trying to get to.
Thank you, everyone. I don't know if we still have. Okay. I don't know if we still have time for any questions online here.
In terms of sustainability and resilience, my thoughts has been revolving around going back to the basics, where we started. Local building materials. When we were growing up, there were a lot of mud houses. Mud houses were cooler. Is there just a way we can revisit what we had locally and try to improve them, because it worked for our forefathers, it worked for people who were our forebearers. Can we go back to basics?
Okay, so that's one. So just one more, sir. That's the last. Thank you. We are trying to maximize time.
Thank you very much. I think my question goes back to the previous discussion. Thank you for at least allowing us to ask questions. I've been agitated over why or why not. Okay. 2 or 3 questions in one. By one person. Oh, okay. We talked about issues confronting development in this sector earlier on. I think one was the environmental and then systemic. And my question, which I'm going to roll into one, is looking forward to a long-term solution in the sector. I'm asking, do we have any public sector housing agency here attending? Yes or no? 2. Yeah, it's still one question rolling. Are there investments into R&D as at institutions of learning to look for long-term solution, funding educational sectors to look into this and developing this into curricula at the university or building, because we have property as disciplines in those institutions. So I will leave it for that now.
So are you a professor or a lecturer by any means? Because if you're, you are those lecturers that their questions have number 1, A, B, C, B, I. So where are we starting from? The answers? Chima?
Okay, yes. So,
First question, Chima. Okay.
Okay. So yes, sir, you're absolutely right. You're very correct. Our ancestors got it right according to the needs that they had at the time. Land was more or less. Land right now is finite, but for them it was almost limitless. Now, if you're building with clay, let me call it clay, like they were doing at that time. Basically, for sustainability, what you want to do is you want to minimize the natural resources. Now, our major finite resource is land. So you don't want to build with more land than you would actually need. So that means you need to go up. Now, how do you go up? And that's the problem that we have that they didn't have, because they were just building bungalows. So how do you go up multiple floors using clay as a structural building material? The answer is it's just not possible. But what you could do is you could use clay as part of your external material for the building envelope, because basically if you stop the heat from coming in, then what you have essentially is a cool space. Do you understand? So so I think that's a hybrid that works. That's part of what we are also experiencing with that homework.
Thank you, Chima.
Thank you.
Thank you. And for the professor's question, I know it's tough, but I think I'm going to direct that as you, Elizabeth. Is that something you can take on? So, are there ways, in order to get long-term solutions, is there a way we can invest in research and development? And can we incorporate some of these topics in curricula for at universities in higher education?
Yeah, okay. So Shelter Africa is the company for Housing for Africa. So we actually give grants for capacity development, and I know that we can also do that. But then we need to, of course, identify if there is a research gap, if there is a particular area that is yet to be addressed. I know that, and we are open to providing grants to take care of that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, so I want to thank the panelists for their insightful contributions. I mean, we haven't had a lot of time. I'm sure we can keep talking and having this discussion, but thank you all very much, and to thank the audience and the organizers. Thank you.